The ballroom of Harlington House hummed with the quiet murmurs of London's high society as they assembled for what was to be the wedding of the season. Ornate flower arrangements perfumed the air with roses and lilies, their sweet scent masking the sourness of gossip that flowed freely among the guests. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, oblivious to the tension below. At the altar stood the Duke of Westmoreland, Dominic Vance, his broad shoulders squared beneath his impeccably tailored morning coat. His jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle twitched visibly beneath his bronzed skin. To the casual observer, he appeared the picture of aristocratic composure, a man born to command respect and admiration. Only those who knew him well might notice the storm brewing in his grey eyes or the way his gloved hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, for the Duke stood alone. The bride's side of the chapel remained conspicuously empty, save for a few uncomfortable-looking relatives who seemed unsure whether to flee or remain seated. "She is not coming," Dominic whispered to his best man, Lord Edmund Talbot, though he already knew the answer. The note that had arrived just 30 minutes prior had made that abundantly clear. Lady Juliana Pembroke, his betrothed of 6 months, had fled to the continent with her music teacher, leaving behind only a hastily scribbled apology and a diamond engagement ring that had been in the Vance family for generations. "Perhaps we should address the guests," Edmund suggested quietly, eyeing the crowd that grew more restless with each passing minute. Dominic felt something break inside him. This public humiliation was merely the culmination of a truth he had long suspected. Love was a luxury not afforded to men of his station. Dukes did not marry for affection, but for advantage, alliance, and heirs. He had forgotten this cardinal rule when he'd allowed himself to believe Juliana's professions of devotion. Now he stood before all of London society, a fool made twice over. "A duke requires a duchess," his father had told him on his deathbed last year. "The title demands it. Your personal feelings are irrelevant." Dominic had dedicated his life to being the duke his father had trained him to be, stoic, responsible, putting duty above all else. Love was a distraction he couldn't afford, a weakness he had been taught to avoid. And yet, in a moment of weakness, he had believed it possible. He would not make that mistake again. "Your Grace," the vicar whispered, stepping closer. The guests grow restive, perhaps an announcement. "Let them wait," Dominic snapped, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Let them see exactly what becomes of a man who puts his trust in the wrong hands." But even as the words left his mouth, a commotion at the back of the chapel drew every eye in the room. The heavy oak doors swung open, admitting a shaft of brilliant light that momentarily blinded those assembled. And in that light stood a woman Dominic had never expected to see again. Beatrice Harlow paused at the threshold, her simple dove-grey dress a stark contrast to the elaborate gowns of the society women who turned to stare. Her chestnut hair was swept into a modest chignon, revealing the graceful curve of her neck and the determined set of her jaw. She carried no bouquet, wore no veil, but held herself with the quiet dignity that had always been her hallmark. 5 years had passed since he'd last seen her, 5 years since she had been cast out of society for a scandal not of her making, 5 years since she disappeared from London with her reputation in tatters. 5 years since he had failed to stand by her side when she needed him most. Beatrice scanned the chapel until her amber eyes met his. Without hesitation, she began walking down the aisle, ignoring the gasps and whispers that followed in her wake. "What is she doing here?" Edmund hissed. "That woman will only compound your humiliation." But Dominic couldn't look away as Beatrice approached, her steps measured and purposeful. She stopped before reaching the altar steps, close enough that he could see the light dusting of freckles across her nose that summer sun had always brought out, close enough that he could detect the faint scent of lavender that had haunted his dreams for years. "Your Grace," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chapel, "I believe you find yourself in need of assistance." For the first time that day, Dominic felt something other than humiliation and anger. Curiosity, perhaps, or something dangerously close to hope. "Miss Harlow," he replied, his voice carefully controlled, "this is hardly the time for a reunion." "On the contrary," Beatrice said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I believe this is precisely the time. You need a bride, I need a husband. And we both," she added, lowering her voice so only he could hear, "need redemption." The vicar cleared his throat nervously. "Your Grace, shall I dismiss the congregation?" Dominic looked at Beatrice, really looked at her. Gone was the innocent young woman he had once known, replaced by someone hardened by experience, yet somehow more authentic for it. Her proposal was madness. She was offering herself as a sacrificial lamb to save his pride, knowing full well that marrying her would spark as much scandal as being jilted at the altar. "You don't know what you're offering," he said quietly. "Society has not forgotten your disgrace. And they will not soon forget yours if you leave this chapel without a bride," she countered. "I am offering a mutually beneficial arrangement, Your Grace. Nothing more. Nothing more. A marriage without love, without illusion." A practical solution to their shared predicament. Wasn't that what he had just resolved to pursue? Hadn't he just sworn off the foolish notion of marrying for affection? "Why?" he asked simply. Beatrice's mask of composure slipped just slightly, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. "Because I require the protection of a powerful name, and you require a wife who harbors no romantic delusions. We are well suited in our pragmatism, if nothing else." The chapel had grown so quiet that Dominic could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the vestibule. Hundreds of eyes watched, hundreds of ears strained to catch every word. "Your reputation," he began, "is already in ruins," she finished for him. "Yours, however, need not be." In that moment, Dominic made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. Whether born of pride, practicality, or some deeper emotion he refused to acknowledge, he found himself nodding. "Very well, Miss Harlow," he said, offering his arm. "Shall we proceed?" Whispers erupted as Beatrice stepped forward to take her place beside him at the altar. The vicar looked between them, clearly uncertain whether to continue. "The banns have not been read," he protested weakly. Dominic reached into his pocket and withdrew a special license obtained weeks ago for his wedding to Juliana. "This will suffice, will it not?" The vicar examined the document, his eyes widening. "Indeed, Your Grace, it requires only the name of the bride to be amended." "Then amend it," Dominic commanded. And so, before a congregation alternating between shock and scandalized delight, the Duke of Westmoreland wed, not the diamond of the season who had abandoned him, but the disgraced daughter of a country gentleman who had once been his dearest friend. Neither bride nor groom smiled as they exchanged vows. Neither's hand trembled as they placed rings on each other's fingers. And when the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the kiss they shared was as brief and formal as a business agreement sealed. "Congratulations, Your Grace," Beatrice murmured as they turned to face the stunned assembly. "And to you, Duchess," Dominic replied, his voice carrying the weight of all they had once been to each other and all they had become. As they processed down the aisle together, Dominic maintained the impassive expression that had earned him the nickname, the Marble Duke, in certain circles. But beneath that mask, his mind raced with questions. What had brought Beatrice back to London after all these years? How had she known of his predicament? And most troubling of all, why did the feel of her hand on his arm awaken feelings he had long believed dead? One thing was certain. They had both entered this marriage believing it a practical solution to their respective problems. Neither had counted on the complications that would arise from the history they shared. A history of friendship turned to love, of promises made and broken, of a scandal that had torn them apart. Now they were bound together, a union formed not in the tender soil of affection, but in the harsh clay of necessity. And yet, as they stepped out into the sunlight to face the world as husband and wife, Dominic couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, they had been given a second chance to right the wrongs of the past. Harlington House, now buzzing with confused wedding guests who had expected one bride and received another, felt suffocating to Beatrice as she stood beside her new husband, receiving congratulations from people who had snubbed her in the streets mere years before. "I'm surprised you had the audacity to show your face in London again, my dear," Lady Winterbourne said with a snake's smile, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I suppose one must admire your resourcefulness." Beatrice returned the smile with equal insincerity. "How fortunate that my husband appreciates resourcefulness in a wife, a quality not all men seek, though perhaps they should." She felt Dominic stiffen beside her, but kept her eyes trained on Lady Winterbourne, whose face had gone rigid with affront. The woman sniffed and moved along, immediately leaning to whisper to her companion. "Was that necessary?" Dominic asked under his breath once they were momentarily alone. "Entirely," Beatrice replied. "If you wished for a docile bride who would simper and apologize for her existence, you should have specified that in our hasty agreement." Dominic studied her face. "You've changed." "We all change, Your Grace. Some by choice, others by necessity." Beatrice glanced around the crowded room, noting the speculative glances cast their way. "I suggest we continue this conversation in private, unless you prefer to give the gossips more fodder." Without waiting for his response, she moved toward the doors leading to the garden, knowing he would follow if only to avoid creating another scene. The May air was sweet with the scent of roses as she stepped onto the terrace, drawing a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart. This was madness, complete madness. And yet when she had read in the morning paper that the Duke of Westmoreland was to marry that very day, something had propelled her to the chapel. Not love, she had excised that weakness from her heart long ago. No, it had been opportunity, pure and simple, or so she told herself. "You owe me an explanation," Dominic said as he joined her, his voice low and controlled. Beatrice turned to face him, taking in the changes 5 years had wrought. The boy she had known had become fully a man, his features sharpened by experience, his eyes more guarded. Only the small scar above his right eyebrow remained familiar, a reminder of the day he had fallen from an apple tree while trying to impress her. "I believe I made myself clear at the altar," she said. "You needed a wife, I needed a husband." "You needed a husband," he repeated slowly. "Why now? Where have you been these past years? And how did you know of my situation today?" Beatrice leaned against the stone balustrade, choosing her words carefully. "I returned to London 3 weeks ago on business. As for today, all of London knew of your wedding. It was announced in every society page. When I arrived at the chapel and observed the commotion, it was not difficult to deduce that your bride had failed to appear. That explains your presence, but not your proposition." His eyes narrowed. "What are you not telling me, Beatrice?" The use of her given name startled her. In their youth, he had called her Bea, a nickname only he was permitted to use. Hearing her full name on his lips now felt both formal and oddly intimate. "My father died last year," she said, deciding that partial truths would serve better than complete lies. "His passing left me in a precarious position. The estate went to a distant cousin, as you might expect, leaving me with little but my good name." She gave a bitter laugh. "And we both know how valuable that has proven to be." Dominic's expression softened slightly. "I was sorry to hear of Sir William's passing. He was a good man." "Yes, he was." Beatrice swallowed the lump that formed in her throat whenever she thought of her father. "He never recovered from the scandal, you know, not truly. His health began failing shortly after we left London." Guilt flickered across Dominic's face. "I should have." "You should have done many things," she interrupted, unwilling to hear whatever justification he might offer. "As should I, but that is the past, and we now find ourselves in the present, married for all practical purposes." "A marriage based on convenience," Dominic said, his voice flat. "Indeed." You gain a duchess, sparing yourself the humiliation of being jilted. I gain the protection of your title and the security it provides. An arrangement beneficial to us both. And what of children? He asked bluntly. The succession. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks despite her determination to remain impassive. I assume that is part of the arrangement. The Westmoreland title requires an heir. Something flickered in his eyes, desire, perhaps, or simply calculation. Then we understand each other. Perfectly, she straightened, smoothing her simple grey dress. Now shall we return to our guests? I believe they expect us to cut the wedding cake that was intended for another bride. Dominic offered his arm with formal courtesy. Before we do, there is one matter we must address. Whatever has brought you back to London, whatever necessity drove you to this marriage, I expect complete honesty between us going forward. I will not be blindsided again. Beatrice placed her hand lightly on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the fine wool of his coat. Honesty, she echoed. An admirable goal, Your Grace, though perhaps ambitious for two people who have built their lives on carefully constructed facades. His jaw tightened. Nevertheless, it is what I require. Then I shall endeavor to meet your expectations, she said, the lie sliding easily from her lips. Though I wonder if you will extend me the same courtesy. Without waiting for his response, she guided them back toward the reception, where they would begin the elaborate dance of pretending their hasty union was anything but what it was. A marriage of desperation, built on the ashes of their shared past. The carriage ride to Vance House, the Duke's London residence, passed in strained silence. Beatrice kept her gaze fixed out the window, watching as the fashionable streets of Mayfair slid by. She had not expected to return to this part of London again, let alone as a duchess. The irony was not lost on her. We will need to fabricate a story, Dominic said abruptly, breaking the silence. About how our reunion came about. Today's events will fuel gossip for weeks, but a plausible narrative might help quell some of the more outlandish speculation. Beatrice turned to study him. In the dim light of the carriage, his features were thrown into sharp relief, the angles of his face more pronounced. What do you suggest? That we rekindled our childhood friendship through correspondence? That we harbored secret affections all these years? Neither seems particularly credible given the circumstances of my departure from society. Dominic's expression hardened. Perhaps the truth, then, that we encountered each other recently and discovered mutual compatibility. The truth, Beatrice repeated with a soft, mirthless laugh. A novel concept for us. Very well. We shall say we met again at my father's funeral, where you expressed your condolences, and a correspondence ensued. Your father's funeral was over a year ago. Yes, but who would know? You could have attended privately, out of respect for our family's former connection. She twisted the new wedding band on her finger, still unfamiliar with its weight. We kept our rekindled relationship private, knowing society would disapprove. When your intended left you at the altar, I stepped forward, unable to bear seeing you humiliated. Dominic considered this, a romantic tale, almost believable. Romantic tales often are believable, regardless of their veracity, Beatrice said. People wish to believe in redemption through love. It comforts them to think that even the disgraced might find happiness. Is that what you believe? He asked, watching her closely. In redemption through love. The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she was transporting back to summer afternoons spent reading poetry by the stream that ran through her father's property, Dominic lying beside her on the grass, teasing her for her romantic notions. I believe in practicality, she answered finally, and in the power of a good story to smooth one's path. Whether I believe in love is irrelevant to our arrangement. The carriage slowed as they approached Vance House, an imposing neoclassical mansion set back from the street behind ornate iron gates. Beatrice had visited once as a girl, accompanying her father on some business with the old Duke. She remembered being intimidated by its grandeur then. Now, she felt a different kind of trepidation as the massive front doors swung open to admit them. A butler greeted them with a deep bow. "Your Grace, Your Grace," he intoned, addressing them both with their titles. "The staff is assembled in the main hall to greet the new Duchess." Dominic nodded. "Thank you, Pearson. Please inform them that the Duchess is fatigued from the day's events and will meet them properly tomorrow. Have a light supper sent up to the Duchess's chambers." "Very good, Your Grace." As Pearson withdrew, Beatrice raised an eyebrow at her new husband. "Deciding my state of mind for me already. I thought you might appreciate avoiding a formal presentation this evening," Dominic replied, "unless you wish to stand through introductions to 24 servants after the day we've had." The consideration surprised her. "No," she admitted, "thank you for the thoughtfulness." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise at her gratitude, crossed his face before he schooled his features back to neutrality. "I'll have Harris show you to your chambers." They were prepared for. He stopped, apparently realizing the awkwardness of mentioning his intended bride. "For another," Beatrice finished for him. "I understand. I'm sure they will suffice." An older woman with a kind face appeared in the hallway, curtsying deeply. "Your Grace, I'm Mrs. Harris, the housekeeper. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms." Beatrice nodded, then turned back to Dominic. "Will you join me for supper?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was prepared to address. Tonight would be their wedding night, an occasion that under normal circumstances would hold certain expectations. "I have correspondence that requires my attention," he said after a moment. "Perhaps it would be best if we both take time to adjust to our new circumstances." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Beatrice's chest. "Of course. Good night then, Your Grace." "Dominic," he corrected quietly. "At least in private. We are husband and wife after all." "Dominic," she repeated, the name feeling both foreign and achingly familiar on her tongue. "Then you must call me Beatrice." Or, she stopped herself before suggesting the childhood nickname that belonged to another life, but he caught the hesitation. "Or B," he finished, his voice softening. "As I once did." Beatrice felt a crack form in the careful armor she had constructed around her heart. "That name belongs to someone I am no longer," she said, more sharply than she had intended. Dominic inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Good night, Beatrice." As she followed Mrs. Harris up the sweeping staircase, Beatrice felt his eyes on her back, but did not turn. This marriage was a means to an end for both of them, nothing more. The sooner they established that fact, the better for them both. The Duchess's chambers were a suite of rooms decorated in soft blues and creams, elegant without being ostentatious. A fire burned in the grate, taking the chill from the spring evening. "These rooms connect to His Grace's through that door," Mrs. Harris explained, indicating a door set into the far wall, "though it's kept locked from both sides for privacy." Beatrice nodded, pretending this information didn't affect her one way or another. "Thank you, Mrs. Harris. I believe I can manage from here." Once alone, she sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the enormity of what she had done to wash over her. She was Duchess of Westmoreland, wife to the man who had once been her dearest friend, her first love, and ultimately her greatest disappointment. And he had no idea of the true reason she had sought this marriage, of the danger that had driven her back to London and into his life. Somewhere in this very house was the evidence she needed, evidence that could either save her or destroy them both. Now she just had to find it before Dominic discovered the real purpose behind her return. Dawn had barely broken when Beatrice awoke, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back as she took in the elegant chamber with its silk hangings and fine furniture. She was the Duchess of Westmoreland now, mistress of this grand house and all that came with it, including its secrets. She rose quickly, ringing for the lady's maid who had been assigned to her. The girl who appeared, Alice, she introduced herself, seemed startled by her new mistress's early rising, but helped her dress in a simple morning gown of pale green muslin. "His Grace is an early riser as well, Your Grace," Alice volunteered as she arranged Beatrice's hair in a simple but elegant style. "He's often in his study by this hour." "Is he indeed?" Beatrice said, filing away this information. "And where might I find the breakfast room?" "Cook will have a tray sent up." "I prefer to breakfast downstairs," Beatrice interrupted gently, "when at all possible." Alice looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Your Grace. I'll show you the way." The breakfast room was a pleasant chamber overlooking the garden, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. To Beatrice's surprise, Dominic was already seated at the table, a newspaper open beside his plate. He looked up at her entrance, setting aside the paper and rising to his feet. "Good morning. I didn't expect you so early." "I've always been an early riser," she said, taking the seat a footman pulled out for her. "A habit from childhood that proved useful during my years as a governess." Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. "A governess? I had wondered how you supported yourself after." "After my disgrace," Beatrice accepted a cup of tea from a servant. "Yes, a governess. What other respectable occupation is available to a gentleman's daughter with a ruined reputation? I was fortunate that my father's old friends, the Ashfords, were willing to employ me in their remote Yorkshire estate, where my history was unknown." "That must have been difficult," Dominic said carefully. "Less difficult than starving," Beatrice replied with a small shrug. "And the children were dear. I remained with them until my father's illness called me home last year." She deliberately omitted mentioning what had happened after her father's death. The discovery of his massive gambling debts, the threats from his creditors, and the most shocking discovery of all, the letter hidden in his desk that had led her back to London, back to the Vance family, and ultimately to this breakfast table. "And what of you?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "I understand you've made quite a name for yourself in Parliament. The papers call you the Reformer Duke." Something like pride flickered across his face. "I merely continue my father's work." He believed that with privilege comes responsibility. "A noble sentiment," Beatrice said, buttering a slice of toast, "though not universally shared by your peers, I imagine." "No," Dominic agreed. "My support for the Factory Acts and opposition to the Corn Laws have made me rather unpopular in certain circles." "Which makes your choice of bride all the more puzzling," she observed. "Surely a reformer would have selected a wife who might bolster his political standing, rather than one who brings scandal in her wake." Dominic set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "I did not select you as my bride, if you recall. You rather selected yourself." Beatrice inclined her head, acknowledging the hit. "Touché, though you were free to refuse my offer." "Was I?" His grey eyes held hers. "With 200 guests watching and my pride already wounded, you calculated the moment perfectly, Beatrice." She couldn't deny it. "Then we are well matched in pragmatism. As I said yesterday, you needed a wife immediately. I provided one. The arrangement benefits us both." "So you keep saying," Dominic leaned forward slightly, "yet you've not been entirely forthcoming about your reasons for requiring this marriage. Protection and security, you said." "From what, exactly?" Beatrice felt her heart quicken, but maintained her composed expression. "The world is not kind to women without protection, Dominic. Surely that's not news to you. A widow with a modest income might manage, but an unmarried woman with a tarnished reputation has precious few options." "And yet you managed for 5 years," he pointed out. "Why the urgency now?" Before she could formulate a response, the butler entered with a silver salver bearing several letters. "The Morning Post, Your Grace," he announced, presenting it to Dominic. Dominic sorted through the correspondence, pausing at one envelope sealed with black wax. His expression darkened as he broke the seal and scanned its contents. "Is something amiss?" Beatrice asked, noting the tension that suddenly radiated from him. "Nothing that need concern you," he said, folding the letter and tucking it into his coat pocket. "Merely some business that requires my attention." He rose from the table. "If you'll excuse me, I have matters to attend to. Perhaps you would like to familiarize yourself with the house today. Mrs. Harris can show you around." "Of course," Beatrice said, hiding her interest in the mysterious letter. "Though I hoped we might discuss my duties as Duchess, I'm afraid I've had little preparation for the role." Dominic paused, seeming to consider this. "Yes, we should discuss that. This evening, perhaps. I'll be occupied until then." "This evening, then," she agreed, watching as he strode from the room with the letter clutched in his hand. As soon as he was gone, Beatrice set down her teacup with a shaking hand. The black seal, the way his demeanor had instantly changed. Could it be connected to what she sought? She needed to know what was in that letter, but how to discover it without revealing her true purpose? One thing was becoming increasingly clear. Her new husband was keeping secrets of his own. And if her suspicions were correct, those secrets might be even darker than hers. The house tour with Mrs. Harris proved more useful than Beatrice had anticipated. Not only did she learn the layout of Vance House, with its labyrinthine corridors and countless rooms, but she also gleaned valuable information about the household routines and, most importantly, the location of Dominic's private study. "His Grace spends most of his time there when at home," Mrs. Harris explained as they passed a set of heavy oak doors on the ground floor. "He's not to be disturbed when the doors are closed unless it's a matter of utmost urgency." Beatrice nodded, noting the location in relation to the library next door. "And does His Grace keep a valet?" "Mr. Richards has been with His Grace since he came of age," the housekeeper replied. "A most devoted servant, though perhaps a bit too protective at times." "Protective?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Harris seemed to realize she'd spoken out of turn. "Merely that Mr. Richards takes his duties very seriously, Your Grace. He served the Vance family for 30 years and is exceptionally loyal." A loyal valet who guarded access to his master. Another obstacle to overcome if Beatrice was to find what she sought. But she had faced worse challenges in the past 5 years. "I understand His Grace's mother is still living," Beatrice said, changing the subject. "Does she reside here?" "The Dowager Duchess maintains her own establishment in Bath, Mrs. Harris explained, relief evident in her voice at the safer topic. "She visits occasionally, though not often since His Grace's father passed." By the end of the tour, Beatrice had a mental map of the house and had identified several potential hiding places for the document she sought. Dominic's study was the most likely location, but also the most difficult to access unobserved. Later that afternoon, she sat in the small writing room adjoining her bedchamber, penning letters to announce her marriage to the few friends who had stood by her after her disgrace. As she wrote, she couldn't help reflecting on the circumstances that had brought her to this point. The scandal that had ruined her had been breathtaking in its simplicity. At 19, she had been caught alone with a young officer in her father's library during a house party. Though nothing improper had occurred, Lieutenant Wilson had merely been returning a book he had borrowed. The compromising situation had been enough to destroy her reputation. What few knew was that the chance discovery had been orchestrated by Lady Juliana Pembroke, who had set her cap for Dominic even then and saw Beatrice as an obstacle. Juliana had arranged for her cousin to enter the library at precisely the right moment, ensuring Beatrice's disgrace. And Dominic, who had been paying court to Beatrice that season, had failed to defend her. Instead, he had withdrawn his attentions, apparently accepting the worst interpretation of events without question. The betrayal had cut deeper than the scandal itself. That he could so readily believe ill of her, after years of friendship and the beginnings of something more, had broken something fundamental in Beatrice's understanding of the world. Now fate had brought them together again, bound in a marriage neither had anticipated. The irony was almost too perfect. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alice entered with a small silver tray bearing a calling card. "Lady Cordelia Talbot is asking to see you, Your Grace," the maid announced. Beatrice took the card, surprised. Cordelia was Lord Edmund Talbot's sister and had once been a casual acquaintance. That she would call so soon after the wedding was unexpected. "Please show her to the blue drawing room," Beatrice said, "and have tea sent in." Moments later, she was greeting a woman she had not seen in 5 years. Lady Cordelia had matured from a pretty girl into a striking woman with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She rose as Beatrice entered, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something like admiration. "Your Grace," Cordelia said with a curtsy, "thank you for receiving me on such short notice." "Lady Cordelia," Beatrice responded warmly, "this is an unexpected pleasure." Once they were seated with tea before them, Cordelia leaned forward eagerly. "I simply had to come. The entire town is talking of nothing but your dramatic wedding. It was the most romantic thing I've ever heard of, stepping forward to save the Duke from humiliation, revealing a secret attachment that had endured despite scandal and separation." Beatrice nearly choked on her tea. "I see news travels quickly, though somewhat embellished in the telling." "Then it's not true." Cordelia looked disappointed. "Edmund said you and the Duke were childhood friends and that there had always been an attachment between you." "Lord Edmund is partially correct," Beatrice said carefully. "The Duke and I did grow up neighbouring one another. As for an attachment—" She shrugged delicately. Life often takes unexpected turns. Cordelia studied her with shrewd eyes. "Indeed it does, like Lady Juliana fleeing with her music teacher the night before her wedding." "Quite the scandal." "I'm sure it must be," Beatrice murmured, "though I've been away from society too long to judge such things properly." "Oh, society will judge quite properly for you," Cordelia said with a wry smile. "Just as they're judging your triumphant return. You've become something of a heroine, you know, the wronged woman reclaiming her rightful place. Quite the romantic narrative." Beatrice set down her teacup. "I'm afraid I don't follow." Cordelia leaned closer. "There are those who always believed you were innocent of the impropriety you were accused of, that you were, in fact, the victim of a deliberate plot." Beatrice felt a chill run through her. "And who might believe such a thing?" "Those who knew Lady Juliana well enough to recognize her capacity for manipulation," Cordelia replied. "I was only 14 at the time of your difficulty, but even I could see how she maneuvered to separate you from the Duke." "That was a long time ago," Beatrice said carefully. "Ancient history now." "Is it?" Cordelia's eyes sparkled with interest. "How fascinating that the woman who schemed to take your place has now been replaced by you. There's a certain poetic justice to it, don't you think?" Before Beatrice could respond, the drawing-room door opened and Dominic entered. He stopped short at the sight of Cordelia, surprise evident on his face. "Lady Cordelia," he said, recovering quickly, "I didn't realize we had a visitor." Cordelia rose, curtsying. "Your Grace. I was just congratulating your Duchess on your marriage. Such a romantic tale, childhood friends reunited after years of separation." Dominic's eyes flickered to Beatrice. "Indeed. Most romantic." "I really must be going," Cordelia said, gathering her gloves. "But I do hope, Your Grace," she added, addressing Beatrice, "that you will consider me a friend. London can be quite tiresome without allies." After Cordelia had departed, Dominic turned to Beatrice with a raised eyebrow. "Cultivating allies already, I see." "She came to me," Beatrice pointed out, "and seemed quite taken with the romantic notion of our reunion." "So I gathered." He moved to the window, watching as Cordelia's carriage pulled away. "Lady Cordelia is well connected and generally well-disposed, but she has a penchant for drama that can sometimes lead to indiscretion. I'll bear that in mind. Beatrice studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders. You seem troubled. Has something happened? Dominic turned to face her, his expression guarded. I received word this morning that there have been inquiries about certain papers that might be in my possession. Papers of a sensitive nature. Beatrice felt her heart skip a beat, but kept her face carefully neutral. What sort of papers? The sort that could damage reputations if they fell into the wrong hands, he said, watching her reaction closely. I mention it because, as my wife, your name is now tied to mine. Any scandal that touches me will touch you as well. I'm well acquainted with scandal, Beatrice reminded him. Perhaps you should be more concerned for your own reputation than mine. My concern is for both, he said, which is why I must ask, is there anything about your return to London that I should know, any connections that might prove problematic? The directness of the question took Beatrice by surprise. Was it possible he suspected her true purpose already? I don't know what you're implying, she said, rising to her feet. I've been perfectly clear about my circumstances. If you have specific suspicions, perhaps you should voice them plainly rather than speaking in riddles. Dominic's jaw tightened. Very well. There are rumors that you've been seen in the company of individuals known to trade in secrets and scandals, that perhaps your return to London was not as innocent as you've portrayed. Beatrice felt a flash of genuine anger. So now I'm to be accused of consorting with blackmailers. Is that it? How convenient that my reputation makes me an easy target for such accusations. I'm not accusing you, Dominic said, his voice softening slightly. I'm asking for the truth, Beatrice. We may have entered this marriage hastily, but we are now bound together. Whatever troubles you face, I can help, but only if you trust me. The sincerity in his voice almost broke her resolve. For a moment, she was tempted to confess everything, her father's gambling debts, the threats she had received, the letter she had discovered that had led her back to Dominic. But the hurt of his past betrayal held her back. He had not trusted her once before, when it mattered most. Why should she trust him now? There is nothing to tell, she said finally. I returned to London because I had nowhere else to go after settling my father's affairs. The opportunity to secure my future through marriage presented itself yesterday, and I took it. That is the whole truth. The lie hung between them like a physical presence, adding yet another barrier to the many that already separated them. I see, Dominic said after a long moment. Then I suppose we should proceed as planned. I promised to discuss your duties as Duchess this evening. Shall we adjourn to my study? As she followed him from the drawing-room, Beatrice felt the weight of her deception growing heavier. She had come to Vance House seeking a specific document, proof of a conspiracy that had destroyed not only her reputation, but potentially her father's life as well. Now she found herself married to the very man who might hold the key to that conspiracy, a man who was beginning to look at her with suspicion in his eyes. The game had become infinitely more complicated, and the stakes impossibly high. Dominic's study was precisely what Beatrice would have expected, masculine and imposing, with dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and a massive desk positioned before tall windows overlooking the garden. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and sandalwood, scents she had come to associate with him. Please sit, Dominic said, gesturing to one of the chairs positioned before the desk. Beatrice took a seat, using the opportunity to scan the room surreptitiously. A portrait of the late Duke hung on one wall, his stern countenance seeming to watch her with suspicion. Bookshelves lined another wall, while a large cabinet with locked glass doors contained what appeared to be family documents and ledgers. Traditionally, the Duchess of Westmoreland oversees the household, manages the social calendar, and serves as hostess for political gatherings, Dominic began, seating himself behind the desk. My mother found the role rather taxing, particularly the political aspect, but given your intelligence, I expect you'll manage admirably." "How flattering," Beatrice murmured. Dominic ignored her tone. "You'll also have charge of charitable endeavors. The Vance family has traditionally supported orphanages and educational initiatives for the poor. My mother has continued to oversee some of these efforts from Bath, but I imagine she'll be pleased to relinquish them to you." "And when do you expect the Dowager Duchess to visit?" "I should like to be prepared for the encounter." A shadow crossed Dominic's face. "My mother is not in the best of health. Her visits to London have become rare in recent years." "I'm sorry to hear that," Beatrice said, genuinely. She had liked the old Duchess, who had always treated her kindly during her childhood visits to Vance House. "Yes, well," Dominic cleared his throat. "As for immediate matters, we should discuss our social schedule. Given the unusual circumstances of our marriage, I think it prudent to withdraw from society for a few weeks." "To allow the gossip to die down," Beatrice suggested. "Precisely. After which, we'll host a dinner to formally introduce you as the Duchess of Westmoreland." He hesitated. "Unless you object." The consideration surprised her. "No, I think that's sensible. Though I doubt a few weeks will be sufficient to quell the speculation entirely." "Perhaps not," he agreed, "but it will give us time to become more comfortable with our arrangement." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "And what of the more personal aspects of our arrangement? You mentioned the succession earlier." Dominic's expression remained carefully neutral. "The succession is important, yes, but I have no intention of rushing matters that require mutual consideration." "How delicately put," Beatrice said, unable to keep a hint of irony from her voice. "Are you suggesting we should come to know each other better before fulfilling the more intimate obligations of marriage?" A faint flush colored Dominic's cheeks, but his gaze remained direct. "I'm suggesting that while ours is a marriage of convenience, it need not be entirely devoid of consideration or respect. I would not have you feel pressured." The unexpected sensitivity of this response caught Beatrice off guard. She had prepared herself for many possibilities, but not for Dominic to show such restraint or thoughtfulness. "That is most considerate," she said finally, "though I am aware of my duties as your wife." "Duties," he repeated, a strange expression crossing his face. "Is that how you view the prospect, as a duty to be endured?" Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. "I merely meant that I understand the expectations of marriage. I'm not some naive girl who requires delicate handling." "No," Dominic said quietly. "You've made it abundantly clear that you are not the girl I once knew." There was something in his tone, regret, perhaps, or nostalgia, that made Beatrice's carefully constructed defenses waver. For a moment, she glimpsed the boy she had loved in the man before her. "People change," she said, more gently than she had intended. "We both have, I think." "Yes," he looked at her, as though truly seeing her for the first time since their reunion. "Though perhaps not entirely." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken memories and might-have-beens. Then Dominic seemed to recollect himself, his expression becoming businesslike once more. "There is one other matter we should discuss," he said, opening a drawer and removing a small leather box. "This belongs to you now." He placed the box on the desk between them. Beatrice opened it to find a stunning sapphire and diamond necklace nestled on black velvet. "The Westmoreland sapphires," Dominic explained, "traditionally worn by the Duchess on formal occasions. They were my mother's and my grandmother's before her." Beatrice touched the magnificent central stone with a fingertip. "They're beautiful, but surely your mother—" "She insisted they be passed to you," Dominic interrupted. "I wrote to her yesterday to inform her of our marriage. Her reply arrived this afternoon, along with instructions to give you the family jewels without delay." "That was most gracious of her," Beatrice said, genuinely touched by the gesture. The Dowager's acceptance, sight unseen, was unexpected. My mother always liked you, Dominic said quietly. She was disappointed when circumstances separated us. Beatrice closed the jewelry box carefully, unwilling to pursue that particular conversation. Please convey my gratitude when next you write to her. I shall treasure these. As she rose to leave, her gaze fell on a small portrait on Dominic's desk that she hadn't noticed before. It showed a younger version of herself, perhaps 16 or 17, sitting beneath an oak tree with a book in her lap. She remembered the day it had been painted. A local artist commissioned by her father had captured the scene during a summer picnic on their estate. You kept it, she said, unable to mask her surprise. Dominic followed her gaze to the portrait. Yes, he said simply. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. He looked at the painting for a long moment before answering. To remind myself of what was lost. The words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken regret. Good night, Dominic, Beatrice said finally, unable to bear the weight of his gaze any longer. As she left the study, her mind raced with conflicting emotions. The portrait, the sapphires, his unexpected consideration regarding their marital relations, none of it fit with the narrative she had constructed about the man who had abandoned her to scandal and ruin. And somewhere in that study, perhaps in one of those locked cabinets, was the document that could explain everything, the letter that her father had mentioned in his own correspondence, the proof of a conspiracy that had destroyed her reputation and driven her family to ruin. She needed to find it, and soon, before Dominic discovered her true purpose, before the fragile truce between them shattered under the weight of old betrayals and new deceptions. Before she began to believe that the man she had married might not be the villain she had painted him to be. 3 days passed in a strange domestic rhythm. Beatrice found herself settling into the role of Duchess with surprising ease, reviewing household accounts with Mrs. Harris, meeting with the cook to plan menus, and familiarizing herself with the charitable works that now fell under her purview. Dominic maintained a polite distance, breakfasting with her each morning before retiring to his study or departing for Parliament. In the evenings, they dined together, conversing about neutral topics, the household, the weather, books they had read. Neither mentioned the portrait in his study or the deeper questions that lingered between them. It was a fragile piece, built on careful avoidance of the past. Yet Beatrice found herself watching him when he wasn't aware, noting the way his brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, the rare smile that transformed his austere features, the gentleness with which he treated the household staff. This was not the callous man who had abandoned her to scandal. This Dominic was more complex, more thoughtful, and infinitely more dangerous to her resolve. On the 4th night after their wedding, Beatrice finally saw her opportunity. Dominic had gone out to his club, mentioning that he would likely be late returning. With the house quieter than usual, she slipped down to his study after the servants had retired for the evening. The door was locked, but Beatrice had come prepared. During her years as a governess, she had learned a variety of unexpected skills, including how to pick a simple lock. The talent had served her well when her charges had accidentally locked themselves in rooms or cabinets. Now it served a more dubious purpose as she worked the hairpin in the lock until she heard a satisfying click. Heart racing, she slipped into the darkened study, closing the door quietly behind her. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. Beatrice lit a single candle, keeping the flame low to avoid detection from outside. Then she began her search, starting with the desk drawers. Most contained what one might expect: correspondence, account books, writing materials. Nothing that spoke to the conspiracy her father had hinted at in his final days. There must be proof, he had whispered, fever-bright eyes staring up at her from his deathbed. Westmoreland has it, old Duke knew everything. Letter from Wilson. Explains it all. Vindication for you, B. Find it. Lieutenant Wilson, the man with whom she had been caught alone, the catalyst for her disgrace. Her father had maintained until his dying breath that Wilson had been part of a plot against them, though he had never been able to explain why anyone would target their family so deliberately. Beatrice moved to the glass-fronted cabinet, using her hairpin once more to work the lock. Inside were ledgers and family documents, carefully organized and labeled. She skimmed through them quickly, finding nothing of relevance until she came to a small leather portfolio marked simply personal. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened it to find a collection of letters bound with silk ribbon. The top one was addressed to the old Duke in a hand she didn't recognize. Unfolding it carefully, she began to read, "Your Grace. As requested, I have investigated the matter concerning L.T. Wilson and his associates. The evidence confirms your suspicions. The young officer was indeed acting under instructions from—" "What are you doing?" Beatrice nearly dropped the letter at the sound of Dominic's voice. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might have been betrayal. "Dominic," she gasped, "I thought you were at your club." Evidently, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Which fails to answer my question. What are you doing in my private study, reading my personal correspondence?" Beatrice's mind raced. She could lie, claim some innocent reason for her presence, but the evidence of her deception was literally in her hands. "Looking for the truth," she said finally, deciding that a partial confession might be her best defense. "The truth about what happened 5 years ago." Dominic's expression hardened. "By breaking into my study in the middle of the night. Is this why you married me? To gain access to my personal papers?" "Not entirely," Beatrice admitted. "But yes, partly. My father believed there was evidence here, proof that what happened to me was no accident but a deliberate plot." "Your father?" Dominic moved closer, his face now illuminated by the candlelight. "The man was half-mad with illness at the end, Beatrice. Surely you don't base your actions on the ramblings of a dying man." Anger flared in her chest. "Do not speak of my father that way. He was many things, but he was not mad. He told me there was a letter from Lieutenant Wilson explaining everything, a confession of sorts, that your father had it." Something flickered across Dominic's face, recognition, perhaps, or confirmation. "And this justified breaking into my private study. You could have simply asked me." "Would you have told me the truth?" Beatrice challenged. "You, who believed the worst of me without question 5 years ago." Pain flashed in his eyes. "Is that what you think, that I believed the accusations against you?" "What else was I to think? You withdrew your attentions completely. You never called, never wrote, never once publicly defended me." The hurt she had carried for years colored her voice. "You let me fall into disgrace, without a word." Dominic stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You don't know," he said finally. "All this time you never knew." "Knew what?" He moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer she hadn't managed to open. From it he withdrew a small wooden box, which he placed before her. "Open it," he said quietly. With trembling fingers, Beatrice lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to her in Dominic's handwriting. Some were yellowed with age, others more recent. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Letters I wrote to you," Dominic explained. "Every week for the first year after you left London, then every month for years after that. Letters you apparently never received." Beatrice stared at the box in disbelief. "That's impossible. I never received a single letter from you." "No," Dominic agreed, "because your father returned them all unopened." He reached into the box and extracted one letter, its seal broken, the paper creased from repeated folding. "Except this one. This came back with a note from Sir William instructing me to cease my attempts at communication. He wrote that you wanted nothing further to do with me or my family." Beatrice took the note with numb fingers, recognizing her father's handwriting instantly. "I never knew," she whispered. "He never told me you had written." "And I believed that you had rejected my attempts to explain," Dominic said. that you had judged me as harshly as society had judged you. Explain what? Beatrice asked, looking up from the letters. What was there to explain about your abandonment? Dominic's expression was pained. I never abandoned you, Beatrice. I was sent away. My father packed me off to our estate in Scotland the very night of the incident, against my protests. By the time I returned to London 3 weeks later, you and your father had left for the country. But why would he send you away at such a time? To prevent me from doing exactly what I intended, offering for you immediately, scandal be damned. Dominic ran a hand through his hair, his frustration still evident years later. My father believed the timing would make it appear that I was acting out of obligation rather than choice. He insisted we wait for the gossip to die down before I approached your father formally. And then you wrote these letters, Beatrice said, gesturing to the box. Letters explaining everything. My absence, my father's reasoning, my intention to court you properly once the worst of the gossip had subsided. His voice grew bitter. Letters your father ensured you never saw. Beatrice felt as though the floor were shifting beneath her feet. For 5 years, she had nursed her resentment, believing Dominic had abandoned her to protect his own reputation. The possibility that her father had deliberately kept them apart had never occurred to her. But why would he do such a thing? She asked, though even as the question left her lips, a terrible suspicion began to form. Dominic's expression was grim. I believe the answer lies in the letter you were reading when I interrupted you. The letter about Lieutenant Wilson. Beatrice glanced down at the forgotten letter in her hand. This speaks of an investigation into Wilson, that he was acting under instructions from someone. Continue reading, Dominic suggested quietly. With a growing sense of dread, Beatrice turned back to the letter. The evidence confirms your suspicions. The young officer was indeed acting under instructions from Lord Harlow, who sought to compromise his daughter after learning of your son's interest in her. It appears Harlow has accrued substantial gambling debts and hoped to force a marriage between his daughter and the wealthy Baron Rothwell, who had expressed interest in Miss Harlow contingent upon her being free of any prior attachment. The scheme to damage her reputation just enough to drive away your son, while not rendering her unmarriageable to Rothwell, was carefully calculated. I regret to inform you that Sir William Harlow appears complicit in this plan, having agreed to arrange the discovery of his daughter in a compromising position in exchange for Rothwell assuming his considerable debts. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. No, she whispered, this cannot be true, my father would never. But even as she denied it, pieces fell into place. Her father's insistence that they leave London immediately after the scandal. His refusal to allow her to contact any of her London acquaintances, including Dominic. The mysterious disappearance of his debts shortly after their retreat to the country, which he had explained as an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative. I'm sorry, Beatrice, Dominic said gently. My father discovered the truth too late to prevent the damage to your reputation, but he documented everything. He intended to clear your name, but... But what? She demanded, tears threatening. Sir William threatened to drag your name through an even worse scandal if the truth came out, Dominic explained. My father faced an impossible choice, expose the plot and potentially cause you even greater harm, or remain silent and allow you to rebuild your life away from London. So he chose silence, Beatrice said bitterly. And my reputation remained in tatters. He chose what he believed would protect you, Dominic corrected. As did I, when I continued to write to you despite your father's warnings to desist. I never stopped trying to reach you, Beatrice. Never. Beatrice stared at the box of letters, physical proof of what he was saying. All these years, she had believed herself abandoned, betrayed by the man she loved. In reality, he had been reaching out to her consistently, his efforts thwarted by her own father. My father's deathbed confession, she said slowly. He said there was proof that would vindicate me. That you had it. She looked up at Dominic, realization dawning. He was consumed with guilt at the end. He wanted me to find this letter so I would know the truth. And know that you were never at fault, Dominic added. That your disgrace was orchestrated by those who should have protected you. Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks as years of hurt and resentment crumbled in the face of this new understanding. All this time, she whispered. All these years of believing you had abandoned me because you thought me guilty of impropriety, of believing I wasn't worthy of defense or loyalty. No, Dominic said fiercely, moving to kneel beside her chair. Never that. I believed in you completely. I fought with my father over his insistence on waiting to offer for you. I wrote to you until my hands cramped. And when your father returned my letters with that note, I nearly rode to your estate in the middle of the night to demand an explanation. My father physically restrained me, convinced I would only make matters worse. Beatrice looked at him through tear-blurred vision, seeing not the distant Duke who had married her days ago, but the passionate young man she had loved, the one who had apparently never stopped fighting for her, even when she believed him indifferent. "Why did you keep this from me when I returned?" she asked, "when I proposed our marriage of convenience?" Dominic's expression grew troubled. "I didn't know if I could trust your motives. Your sudden appearance at the chapel seemed too convenient, too calculated. I suspected you might have ulterior reasons for seeking this marriage." "As indeed I did," Beatrice acknowledged, "though not the ones you feared. I wasn't working with blackmailers, as you suspected. I was seeking the truth about my own disgrace. And I was protecting family secrets," Dominic said, "including the fact that your father had betrayed you. I didn't want to be the one to destroy your memory of him." The tenderness of that admission broke something inside Beatrice. For 5 years, she had nurtured her anger and hurt, using it as a shield against further pain. Now that shield was gone, leaving her vulnerable in a way she hadn't been since she was 19 and newly in love. "Where does this leave us?" she asked quietly. Dominic reached out to take her hand, his touch tentative. "That depends on what you want, Beatrice. Our marriage was entered into under false pretenses on both sides. If you wish to have it annulled, I would understand." "Annulled?" The suggestion startled her. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," Dominic said carefully, "is what I have wanted since I was 20 years old. A chance to court you properly, to win your affection fairly, without manipulation or deceit between us." "But we're already married," Beatrice pointed out. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a real smile, not the polite one he had been offering since their wedding. "Then perhaps we could begin again. Not as the Duke and Duchess of Westmoreland, bound by convenience and circumstance, but as Dominic and Beatrice, two people with a history both painful and precious." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, feeling a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the candle flickering nearby. "I'm not the girl you knew," she warned. "That innocent, trusting creature died the day my reputation was destroyed. And I am not the young man who failed to fight hard enough to reach you," Dominic replied. "We have both been shaped by what happened, but perhaps that makes whatever we might build now all the more valuable for having been tested." Beatrice considered his words, the years of hurt and misunderstanding that had separated them, and the strange twist of fate that had brought them together again. She thought of the box of letters, tangible proof of his constancy, and the portrait he had kept on his desk all these years. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like very much to begin again. Not to forget the past, but to understand it better, and perhaps in time to forgive both others and ourselves." Dominic's eyes, warm in the candlelight, held hers. "Then may I suggest a first step in our new beginning?" "What would that be?" He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent a shiver through her. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to dinner tomorrow evening, not as my duchess, but as my guest? I know a small French restaurant where we might talk without the weight of titles and expectations." Beatrice felt a smile, her first genuine smile in years, tug at her lips. "I would like that very much, Dominic." "Good," he said, rising and helping her to her feet. "Then I shall look forward to calling on you tomorrow at 7. As they left the study together, the box of letters carefully closed and returned to its drawer, Beatrice felt lighter than she had in years. The truth she had sought had proven more complex and more painful than she had imagined, but it had also offered something she had never expected to find, a chance at redemption, not just for her reputation, but for her heart. The Duke might have stood alone at the altar, heartbroken by betrayal, until she stepped forward and changed everything. But now they stood together, no longer bound merely by convenience or necessity, but by the promise of something far more precious: truth, understanding, and the possibility of love reclaimed. 6 months later, Beatrice stood in the grand ballroom of Vance House, watching as London's elite mingled and danced beneath crystal chandeliers. The Westmoreland Winter Ball, a tradition revived after years of neglect, had drawn every notable family in society, all eager for a glimpse of the Duke and his unexpected Duchess. "You've created quite the sensation," Cordelia Talbot said, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of champagne. "The entire room is buzzing with admiration for what you've accomplished." Beatrice accepted the offered glass with a smile. "The credit belongs to the committees who do the actual work. I merely provide the patronage." "Don't be modest," Cordelia chided. "Establishing a foundation to provide education and employment for women who have fallen on hard times. That's revolutionary, particularly coming from a duchess." "Perhaps," Beatrice allowed, "but necessary. Women with tarnished reputations or reduced circumstances deserve more options than marriage or destitution." Her gaze drifted to where Dominic stood in conversation with several members of Parliament. As though sensing her attention, he looked up, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room. The smile he gave her, private, intimate, still had the power to make her heart quicken after months of marriage. "You're fortunate, you know," Cordelia said, following her gaze, "to have found love twice with the same man." Beatrice turned to her friend in surprise. "What makes you say that?" Cordelia laughed. "Please, anyone with eyes can see how it is between you two. Whatever arrangement you began with has clearly evolved into something far more profound." Beatrice couldn't deny it. The careful courtship Dominic had proposed that night in his study had blossomed into a deep and abiding love, one built not on the idealism of youth, but on the hard-won wisdom of experience. They had spent weeks talking, truly talking, about the past and their hopes for the future. Each letter from his collection that she read had helped heal another piece of her wounded heart. And when they had finally shared a bed as husband and wife, it had been with a passion and tenderness that transcended physical desire, a communion of souls long separated, finding their way back to each other. "We've been blessed with a rare second chance," Beatrice acknowledged. "Not many are so fortunate." "Which is why your foundation is so important," Cordelia said. "It offers second chances to women who might otherwise never find them." Across the room, Dominic excused himself from his conversation and made his way toward them, his tall figure commanding attention as he moved through the crowd. "Ladies," he said as he reached them, bowing slightly, "I trust you're enjoying the evening." "Immensely," Cordelia assured him, "though I believe I see Lord Ashton attempting to catch my eye. If you'll excuse me." As Cordelia departed, Dominic offered his arm to Beatrice. "Would you care to step onto the terrace for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Curious, Beatrice allowed him to lead her through the French doors onto the terrace, where the December air was crisp but not unpleasant. Stars glittered overhead in a clear sky, and the sounds of the ball faded to a distant murmur. "Is everything all right?" she asked, as he closed the doors behind them. Dominic's expression was unreadable in the moonlight. "I received a letter today from my mother. She's feeling much stronger and wishes to visit London after Christmas." "That's wonderful news," Beatrice said sincerely. She had been corresponding regularly with the Dowager Duchess and had grown fond of the older woman's sharp wit and kind heart. I look forward to finally meeting her in person. She's especially eager to meet you, Dominic said, a slight smile playing about his lips, particularly given her newest grandchild will arrive by summer. Beatrice froze, her heart suddenly racing. What did you say? Dominic's smile broadened as he reached out to take her hands. Dr. Merriweather visited me this afternoon after examining you. He confirmed what you've suspected these past weeks. I'm with child, Beatrice whispered, joy and fear mingling in her chest. Truly. Truly, Dominic confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. We are to be parents, my love. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes as his hand gently came to rest against her still flat abdomen. I wanted to tell you myself when I was certain, she said, covering his hand with her own. Forgive the doctor's indiscretion, Dominic said. He was simply too pleased with the news to keep it entirely to himself. Though he swore me to secrecy until you chose to make your announcement. Then how does your mother know? Dominic laughed. She doesn't, not yet, but she has been hinting rather heavily in her letters that she expects news of a grandchild soon. She'll be insufferably pleased with herself for her prescience. Beatrice smiled through her tears, overcome with happiness. After so many years of loneliness and struggle, to find herself not only loved, but now expecting a child seemed almost too much good fortune. Are you happy? Dominic asked, searching her face. Happier than I ever thought possible, she assured him, reaching up to touch his cheek. Are you? In answer, he drew her into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. When they finally parted, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. When you stepped forward in that chapel 6 months ago, he said quietly, I thought you were offering a solution to my humiliation. I never dreamed you were actually offering me redemption, a chance to right the wrongs of the past and build a future I had long ago resigned myself to never having. We redeemed each other, Beatrice corrected gently. Each of us carrying wounds only the other could heal. Dominic smiled, brushing a tendril of hair from her face. My brilliant, beautiful wife, how fortunate I am that you chose to change everything that day. From inside came the strains of a waltz, the same one they had danced to at their first ball together a lifetime ago. Shall we? Dominic asked, offering his hand. For old time's sake. Beatrice placed her hand in his, feeling the warm strength of his fingers as they closed around hers. For new beginnings, she countered with a smile. As he led her back into the ballroom, where they took their places among the other dancers, Beatrice marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From scandal to redemption, from bitter separation to joyful reunion, from a marriage of convenience to one of the deepest love. The Duke had indeed stood alone at the altar that day, heartbroken and humiliated. But when she stepped forward, she had changed not only his destiny but her own, proving that sometimes the bravest act is not to forget the past, but to face it, and in doing so, find the future that was always meant to be.